I was bit by our dog. He got me real good.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle Johnson. I own Best Life Dog Services, and I'm a certified dog behavior consultant specializing in aggressive behavior. Resource guarding is definitely one of the more common types of aggressive behavior I see. It shows up in family-directed aggression, it shows up in intra-household aggression, it shows up under what we might call conflict aggression. This pet parent has reached out to the internet for support after being bitten by their 8-month-old golden retriever over a high-value food item, and I'd like to share some thoughts around common pitfalls related to resource guarding, a little bit of what not to do, a bit of what to do, what next steps to take, how to stay safe in the meantime and to prevent things from getting worse, and really to start off with what is happening. So when I was taking Michael Shikashio's Aggression in Dogs course, one of my favorite facts that I learned was that golden retrievers, genetically speaking, are the #1 resource guarders. Beagles are the #2. It is very common for resource guarding behaviors to show up in adolescence, and 8 months is right near the beginning of adolescence. It usually starts around 6 months of age. This is a time where the thinking brain physically, temporarily shrinks, the limbic system becomes overactive, the amygdala specifically. We see higher than average stress levels just because of the developmental period that we're in. We see sleep disturbances. We see increased needs for social support. We see impulsive decision making. So this is a really common time to see behavior concerns begin to emerge. Resource guarding itself is a very natural behavior. Humans are huge resource guarders. We lock things, we get entire security systems. We are very big resource guarders. And so we can understand how dogs might have similarly big feelings about their resources. Just because a behavior is natural doesn't mean it can't turn into a problem. And so when someone's safety is at risk, either emotional safety or physical safety, now it's a problem. What we want to do is look at the function of the behavior. In the case of resource guarding, the function of the aggressive behavior is to create distance between the threat to the resource, in this case the human, and the resource itself. There are usually more subtle warning signs leading up to a bite, but they can be easier to miss, especially if you're not familiar with what to look for. Some of the very first signs of resource guarding can be things like eating the food faster, losing fine motor skills as they eat, so kind of punching the bowl or the ground or taking the food harder, weight shifting around the bowl, pausing or freezing as they eat, stopping to look up at the person or watching the person from some side eye as they eat. We might see pausing to lick the lips, yawn, turn the head away. We might see standing over the bowl. It's a slow feeder bowl with high value goodies in it. In this example, that's why I'm talking a lot about bowls and food. And then we might escalate to more overt behaviors like becoming very tense, growling, lifting the lips, vocalizing, snapping, lunging, biting. And from there, we might see an increasing intensity of the bites. There's a lot of bad advice out there when it comes to dog training and behavior, especially around resource guarding. And it's not just bad advice, it's dangerous advice. Things that we absolutely do want to do include paying attention to the dog's signals. If the dog is giving off any signals that they are uncomfortable with your presence, we want to back off. That's how the dog learns they don't have to escalate to increasingly aggressive behavior. We can hear them when they're being quiet. Again, there's nothing wrong with them wanting to keep access to this item. We can learn to meet everyone's needs. If we need to get the item away from the dog, we can learn to do that without completely disregarding the dog's feelings and backing them into a corner where they feel they need to escalate, which is not what I think this pet parent is doing, but it is what a lot of advice on the internet sets the dog up to do. A lot of advice on the internet will say to stand your ground, to try to be dominant over your dog, to push in, to insist on taking the item, to resource guard the item back. We don't want to do any of that. That's going to make things worse. even if we successfully punish the behavior in the moment, the dog still has all of their remaining feelings about the item and about the item being taken. And we are going to see that stress build up, those negative associations build up, but we are going to lose our warning signs. So we don't want to punish the behavior with yelling, scolding, shock collars, penny cans, loud noises, verbal corrections, hitting, leash pops, any of that. All that's going to do is make a dangerous situation where we don't get warning signs, but we intensify the negative associations, we intensify the stress levels, and then we're going to get more escalated, more intense responses that are going to feel like they came out of nowhere. The first thing we do want to do is set up management. So we might notice where we're seeing resource guarding and set up a plan to reduce stress. In some cases, that might mean not giving the dog the high value item, at least in the short term, or it might mean setting up a way to safely take the item away when the dog is done or when we need the dog to be done. Depending on the level of stress and how close you can safely get before the dog begins having negative emotions and being worried, different things might be appropriate for different scenarios. In a lot of situations, you can toss a treat away from the item, ideally something higher value than what the dog currently has. And while the dog is getting the item, you can pick up, or is getting the treat, you can pick up the item and take it away. In some cases, it may be appropriate to add a physical barrier before you pick up the item. So you toss the treat into another room and close the door before you pick up the item. It's all going to depend on the level of risk present, how stressed the dog is, the negative associations, the dog's bite history. So this can really depend on the assessment of risk in an individual situation. But creating space and trading the dog for something higher value is often a good place to start investigating. We can also use physical barriers for safety while the dog is enjoying their item, so employing things like closed doors, baby gates, X-pens, and then allowing the dog to leave the space before we go in for the item. So again, creating space before we're trying to take the item. And then what we do want to do is change the emotion associated with our approach. And so right now, my approach to the dog while they have their item, let's say this dog, has the slow feed bowl. Right now, my approach signals something negative. The dog says, you're approaching and you're going to take away my thing. And so we want to change that perception. We want the dog to think, oh, my human is coming over while I have this high value thing. That's a good thing for me. And we generally do this through counter conditioning. So we teach the dog that our approach when they have the high value thing predicts something positive. The tricky part is that with resource guarding, there are a lot of variables to consider. So anytime we're looking at a behavior issue, we want to break down the criteria really finely so that the dog can be successful. So I'm not going to start with my dog with this slow feed bowl filled with high value items and start counter conditioning there with me walking up and approaching and dropping down a high value treat, because the dog is already biting at that level. They're way out of their learning brain. They're fully in their survival brain, their limbic system. That's not where good learning takes place. So I need to pay attention to a lot of variables, like how long my dog has had the item, how valuable the item in question is, who is approaching, the angle of approach, the speed of approach, the direction of approach. I need to consider, in the case of a food item, how hungry the dog is or how currently satiated. I need to consider the novelty of the item, how long they've had it. The book Mine by Jean Donaldson is definitely an oldie but a goodie, and it gets into all of the different variables to consider with resource guarding. It sounds complicated, but a good behavior professional can help you break down that criteria and walk you through successfully. It can be really challenging to find an evidence-based professional, someone who is going to help you make the problem better and not worse. You want to avoid anyone who's going to approach this problem from a perspective of having authority or respect or leadership over your dog. That has nothing to do with anything. Your dog just likes their thing, just like you like to lock your doors to keep your things safe. You want to avoid anyone who's using punishment, suppression, who's trying to just stop the behavior without changing how the dog feels. You want to avoid anyone who's just coming at this with operant conditioning, just teaching manners or just teaching behaviors, as opposed to addressing the underlying emotion, even if they're using positive reinforcement. And we have a whole playlist on how positive reinforcement operant conditioning isn't going to address behavior concerns. I do work with clients worldwide, and so I would be happy to connect with this pet parent, or if they'd like to reach out, I'd be happy to help you find appropriate support. We do have a section in our live Google document all about resource guarding. Best of luck.